a ver a mi jarabe aforrado. 4. Y vente conmigo, y yo te daré zapatos de raso, color de café. Of these poetical sublimities, a translation at once literal and metrical would, we think, damp the spirit of a Coleridge. 1. Lining of my life, how are you? How do you do? How have you passed the night? Have you met with nothing new? 2. Lining of my life, to you I should like to sing, but that my eyes are weak, and tears might begin to spring. 3. From Guadalajara fighting with a soldier I came on, my well-lined sweet syrup, I came to see you alone. 4. And come then with me, and I will give thee such fine shoes of satin, the color of tea. It is coffee, but you will excuse the poetical license. The music married to this immortal verse I have learned by ear, and shall send you. In the enanos, the dwarfs, the dancer makes himself little every time the chorus is sung. 1. Ah, qué bonitos son los enanos, los chiquititos y mexicanos. 2. Sale la linda, sale la fea, sale el enano con su zalea. 3. Los enanitos se enojaron, porque a las enanas les pellizcaron. There are many more verses, but I think you will find these quite satisfactory. Ah, how pretty are the dwarfs, the little ones, the Mexicans! Out comes the pretty one, out comes the ugly one, out comes the dwarf with his jacket of skin. The little he dwarfs were angry because some one pinched the she dwarfs. There is another called the toro, of which the words are not very interesting, and the zapatero or shoemaker was very well danced by a gentleman who accompanied himself at the same time on the guitar. Yesterday morning we set off in a burning sun over a perfect Egyptian desert, to visit the famous arches of Zempoala, a magnificent work, which we are told had greatly excited the admiration of Mr. Poinsett when in this country. This aqueduct, the object of whose construction was to supply these arid plains with water, was the work of a Spanish Franciscan friar, and has never been entirely concluded. We travelled about 6 leagues, and sat there for hours, looking up at the great stone arches, which seem like a work of giants. In the afternoon we all rode to the Plaza de Toros. The evening was cool, and our horses good, the road pretty and shady, and the plaza itself a most picturesque enclosure, surrounded by lofty trees. Chairs were placed for us on a raised platform, and the bright green of the trees, the flashing dresses of the toreadors, the roaring of the fierce bulls, the spirited horses, the music and the cries, the Indians shouting from the trees up which they had climbed, all formed a scene of savage grandeur, which, for a short time at least, is interesting. Bernardo was dressed in blue satin and gold, the picadors in black and silver, the others in maroon coloured satin and gold; all those on foot wear knee breeches and white silk stockings, a little black cap with ribbons, and a plait of hair streaming down behind. The horses were generally good, and as each new adversary appeared, seemed to participate in the enthusiasm of their riders. One bull after another was driven in roaring, and as here they are generally fierce, and their horns not blunted as in Mexico, it is a much more dangerous affair. The bulls were not killed, but were sufficiently tormented. One stuck full of arrows and fireworks, all adorned with ribbons and coloured paper, made a sudden spring over an immensely high wall, and dashed into the woods. I thought afterwards of this unfortunate animal, how it must have been wandering about all night, bellowing with pain, the concealed arrows piercing its flesh, and looking like gay ornaments. So when the watchful shepherd from the blind wounds with a random shaft the careless hind, distracted from her pain she flies to the woods, bounds o'er the lawn, and seeks the silent floods, with fruitless care, for still the fatal dart sticks in her side and rankles in her heart. If the arrows had stuck too deep, and that the bull could not rub them off against the trees, he must have bled to death. Had he remained, his fate would have been better, for when the animal is entirely exhausted, they throw him down with a lasso, and pulling out the arrows, put ointment on the wounds. The skill of the men is surprising, but the most curious part of the exhibition was when a coachman of 's, A strong, handsome Mexican, mounted on the back of a fierce bull which plunged and flung himself about as if possessed by a legion of demons, and forced the animal to gallop round and round the arena. The bull is first caught by the laso and thrown on his side, struggling furiously. The man mounts while he is still on the ground. At the same moment the laso is withdrawn and the bull starts up, maddened by feeling the weight of his unusual burden. The rider must dismount in the same way, the bull being first thrown down, otherwise he would be gored in a moment. It is terribly dangerous, for if the man were to lose his seat, his death is nearly certain, but these Mexicans are superb riders. A monk who is attached to the establishment seems an ardent admirer of these sports, and his presence is useful in case of a dangerous accident occurring, which is not unfrequent. The amusement was suddenly interrupted by sudden darkness, and a tremendous storm of rain and thunder, in the midst of which we mounted our horses and galloped home. Tulansingo, 8th. Another bull fight last evening. It is like pulque; one makes wry faces at it at first, and then begins to like it. One thing we soon discovered, which was, that the bulls, if so inclined, could leap upon our platform, as they occasionally sprang over a wall twice as high. There was a part of the spectacle rather too horrible. The horse of one of the picadors was gored, his side torn up by the bull's horns, and in this state, streaming with blood, he was forced to gallop round the circle. We spent one day in visiting Omatusco, an hacienda belonging to the Señora T a, situated in the plains of Apan, and famous for the superior excellence of its pulque. The organas, the nopal, and great fields of maguey constitute the chief vegetation for many miles round. The hacienda itself, a fine large building, stands lonely and bleak in the midst of magueys. A fine chapel, left unfinished since her husband's death, attracted our attention by its simple architecture and unpretending elegance. It is nearly impossible to conceive anything more lonely than a residence here must be, or in fact in any of the haciendas situated on these great plains of Otumba and Apan. This morning we set off for Tulansingo in 4 carriages and 6, containing the whole family, ourselves, maids and children, padre, and nursery governess, relays being placed all along the road, which we traversed at full gallop. But in crossing some great pasture fields, the drivers of 2 of the carriages began to race. One of the horses fell and threw the postilion. The carriage itself was overturned, and though none of the inmates was injured, the poor mozo was terribly wounded in his head and legs. No assistance being near, he changed places with one of the men on horseback, and was brought on slowly. About 3 in the afternoon we arrived at Tulansingo, rather an important city in its way, and which has been the theatre of many revolutionary events, with various streets and shops, a handsome church, alcaldes, a prefect, etc. There appear to be some few good houses and decent families and clean small shops, and there are pretty shady walks in the environs, and though there are also plenty of miserable dwellings and dirty people, it is altogether rather a civilized place. The house of , which stands within a courtyard, and is the house par excellence, is very handsome, with little furniture, but with some remnants of luxury. The dining hall is a noble room with beautiful Chinese paper, opening into a garden, which is the boast of the republic, and is indeed singularly pretty, and kept in beautiful order, with gravel walks and fine trees, clear tanks and sparkling fountains, and an extraordinary profusion of the most beautiful flowers, roses especially. There is something extremely oriental in its appearance, and the fountains are ornamented with china vases and Chinese figures of great value. Walking along under arches formed by rose bushes, a small column of water spouted forth from each bush, sprinkling us all over with its showers. But the prettiest thing in the garden is a great tank of clear water, enclosed on 3 sides by a Chinese building, round which runs a piazza with stone pillars shaded by a drapery of white curtains. Comfortable, well-cushioned sofas are arranged along the piazza, which opens into a large room, where one may dress after bathing. It is the prettiest and coolest retreat possible, and entirely surrounded by trees and roses. Here one may lie at noonday with the sun and the world completely shut out. They call this an English garden, than which it rather resembles the summer retreat of a sultan. When we arrived, we found dinner laid for 40 persons, and the table ornamented by the taste of the gardener, with pyramids of